The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William stood before his wardrobe, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for a simple navy sweater. Today was different. Today was not about royal duties or public appearances. Today was about something he had been denying himself for months, a chance to feel human again. Catherine had been gone for 3 weeks now, attending to her mother's illness in Scotland, and the silence in their home had become deafening. The children were at school, their laughter and chaos temporarily absent, leaving William alone with thoughts he had been pushing away for far too long. He caught his reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at him. The weight of loss, duty, and an increasingly complicated marriage had etched lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from an unknown number made his heart skip, still thinking about our conversation at the charity gala. Coffee sometime? Emma Richardson. The name alone sent a warmth through his chest that he hadn't felt in years. She was a child psychologist who had approached him at last month's mental health charity event, not with the usual deference and formality, but with genuine curiosity about his thoughts on childhood trauma. For 20 minutes, they had talked as equals, not as a prince and a subject, but as two people passionate about helping children heal from loss. William had found himself sharing things he had never spoken about publicly, the nightmares he still had about his mother's death, the way he sometimes felt like a fraud when comforting grieving families because his own grief felt so unresolved. Emma had listened without judgment, her brown eyes filled with understanding rather than pity. When she handed him her card that night, he had told himself he would never use it. But the card had remained in his wallet, and her words had echoed in his mind during sleepless nights. He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Lunch would be better." "Somewhere quiet?" Her response came quickly, "I know just the place. Hideaway Cafe on Marylebone Lane. 1 p.m.? William's hands shook as he typed, "I'll be there." The decision felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. He knew the risks, the media scrutiny, the potential damage to his marriage, the disappointment from his grandmother. But something deeper was driving him forward, a desperate need to connect with someone who saw him as William rather than the Duke of Cambridge. He chose his clothes carefully, jeans, the navy sweater, a baseball cap, and sunglasses. The outfit of a man trying to disappear, to be ordinary for just a few hours. His protection officer, James, raised an eyebrow when William explained he wanted to make an unscheduled stop for lunch. "Sir, we should coordinate with the advance team." "No advance team," William interrupted. "Just you, watching from a distance. I need to do this." James had been with the royal family for 15 years and recognized the tone in William's voice. It was the same desperate edge he had heard when William insisted on flying his own helicopter to rescue missions, those moments when the prince needed to feel useful beyond the ceremonial. The drive through London felt surreal. William watched ordinary people living their ordinary lives through tinted windows, and, for a moment, he envied their anonymity. At traffic lights, mothers pushed strollers, couples held hands, teenagers laughed loudly on street corners. None of them carried the weight of a 1,000-year-old institution on their shoulders. Hideaway Cafe was exactly as its name suggested, a small, intimate space tucked between a bookshop and a vintage clothing store. William arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table partially hidden by a large potted plant. The cafe was warm and inviting, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. It was the kind of place he imagined normal people came to escape the world. He ordered a coffee and waited, his heart racing with anticipation and guilt in equal measure. What was he doing? He was a married man, a father, a future king. But, as he sat there, surrounded by the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of coffee cups, he felt more like himself than he had in months. Emma arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, and William's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple green dress with a cream cardigan, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way the media typically described women, but there was something magnetic about her presence, an intelligence in her eyes and a warmth in her smile that made the rest of the cafe fade into the background. "You actually came," she said, sliding into the seat across from him, and her genuine surprise made him laugh. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "This is complicated for me." I imagine everything is complicated for you, Emma replied, signaling the waitress. That's partly why I wanted to see you again. I'd been thinking about what you said at the gala, about feeling like your grief doesn't belong to you anymore. The directness of her comment caught him off guard. Most people danced around difficult topics with him, cushioning their words in layers of politeness and deference. Emma spoke to him like she would speak to anyone, and it was both refreshing and unsettling. I've never really talked about that with anyone, William said quietly. My wife thinks I dwell too much on the past. She says I use my mother's death as an excuse to avoid intimacy. The words tumbled out before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted the disclosure. He had just revealed intimate details of his marriage to a virtual stranger. But Emma didn't look shocked or eager for gossip. Instead, her expression grew thoughtful. Grief doesn't follow anyone else's timeline, she said gently. And it's particularly complicated when your loss becomes public property. How do you mourn someone when the whole world thinks they own your story? William felt tears prick at his eyes. In 17 words, this woman had articulated something he had been struggling to express for 26 years. The relief of being understood was overwhelming. They ordered sandwiches, but neither touched their food as they talked. Emma told him about her work with children who had lost parents, about how she had gotten into psychology after losing her own father in a car accident when she was 12. William found himself sharing memories of his mother that he had never spoken about publicly, her laugh, the way she used to sneak candy into his school bag, how she would let him stay up past his bedtime to talk when he was worried about something. She would have loved this place, William said, looking around the cozy cafe. She was always trying to find ways to be normal, to give Harry and me normal experiences. What would she think about your life now? Emma asked. The question hit him like a physical blow. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. She would be proud of the work we do with the foundation, he said finally. But she would be worried about me. She always said the monarchy would try to consume us if we let it, that we had to fight to stay human. And, are you? Fighting to stay human? William looked across the table at Emma, at her open, non-judgmental face, at the way she leaned forward slightly when she listened, as if his words were the most important thing in the world. I'm trying to, he whispered. The conversation flowed effortlessly from there. They talked about books, she recommended authors he had never heard of, and he promised to read them. She told him about her travels, the year she spent working with refugee children in Greece, and how it had changed her perspective on resilience. He shared his frustration with the limitations of royal charity work, how he sometimes felt like he was just a wealthy person writing checks rather than making real change. You have more influence than you realize, Emma said. When you talk about mental health, people listen. When you share your own struggles, it gives other people permission to acknowledge theirs. But, what if I don't want the influence? William asked. What if I just want to be a normal father, a normal husband? What if I want to have lunch with someone without worrying about photographers or constitutional implications? Emma reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of awareness through his entire body. She pulled her hand back quickly, but the warmth lingered on his skin. Then, have lunch, she said simply. Be present in this moment. Everything else is just noise. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. William knew he was standing at a crossroads. He could finish his coffee, thank Emma for her time, and return to his carefully controlled life. Or he could take a step into unknown territory, following a connection that felt more real than anything he had experienced in years. I should go, he said finally, though he made no move to leave. Should you? Emma asked softly. Or do you think you should? The distinction was subtle but important. William had spent his entire life doing what he should do, saying what he should say, being who he should be. But, what did he actually want? I want to stay, he admitted. I want to keep talking to you. I want to pretend for just a little longer that I'm not who I am. You are who you are, Emma said. The titles and the expectations don't change that. You're still the boy who lost his mother, the father who worries about his children, the man who wants to make a difference in the world. Those parts of you are real, no matter what anyone else says. William felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he had built around his heart to protect himself from disappointment and judgment. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a symbol or a role, but as a human being with fears and dreams and needs. The afternoon stretched on, and neither of them seemed inclined to break the spell. Emma told him about her apartment near the Thames, how she liked to sit by the window and watch the boats go by. William shared his love of flying, the freedom he felt in a cockpit where rank and protocol didn't matter. They discovered a shared fascination with history, a mutual love of documentaries, and similar views on child welfare. "I have a confession," Emma said as the cafe began to fill with the afternoon crowd. "I knew who you were before the gala. I mean, obviously everyone knows who you are. But I had read about your mother's work with children, and I wanted to understand how it influenced your approach to mental health advocacy." William was surprised to find he wasn't offended by her admission. Most people pretended they didn't recognize him, which always felt dishonest. "And what did you conclude?" "That you're carrying her mission forward in your own way," Emma said. "But also that you're carrying the weight of it alone. That's not sustainable." "Catherine tries to understand." "I'm not talking about understanding," Emma interrupted gently. "I'm talking about sharing the load. There's a difference between someone who supports your work and someone who truly comprehends the emotional cost of it." William knew she was right, though he couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. Catherine was a wonderful mother and a dedicated duchess, but she had never lost a parent. She had grown up in a stable, loving family where difficult emotions were discussed and processed rather than buried under duty and obligation. She couldn't understand the particular ache of unresolved grief or the exhaustion that came from constantly performing strength for the public. "It's getting late," William said, glancing at his watch. He needed to pick up the children from school, needed to return to his real life. But the thought of leaving felt like tearing away a piece of himself. "I know," Emma said softly. "This was dangerous," William finished. "I was going to say necessary," Emma replied. They looked at each other across the small table, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. This was no longer a simple lunch between acquaintances. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. "Can I see you again?" William asked, the words escaping before he could censor them. Emma hesitated, and he could see her weighing the implications. She was an intelligent woman who understood the potential consequences of getting involved with a married member of the royal family. But she was also someone who recognized the profound loneliness in his eyes, the desperate need for genuine human connection. "Yes," she said finally. "But we need to be careful." "I know," William said, though he wasn't sure he cared about being careful anymore. The afternoon with Emma had reminded him what it felt like to be alive, to be engaged with another person on a level that went beyond small talk and social obligations. They exchanged numbers properly this time, and Emma suggested they could meet again the following week at a small gallery she knew in Bloomsbury. As they prepared to leave, William caught sight of himself in the cafe's mirror and was surprised to see that the lines of tension around his eyes had softened. He looked younger, more relaxed than he had in months. The walk to their respective cars was awkward, both of them aware that James was watching from across the street and that this public goodbye needed to appear casual. Emma extended her hand for a formal handshake, but when William took it, neither of them let go immediately. The touch lingered just long enough to confirm that what had passed between them was real and mutual. "Thank you," William said quietly, "for seeing me." "Thank you," Emma replied, "for letting yourself be seen." As William drove back to Kensington Palace, his mind raced with the implications of the afternoon. He felt guilty about the secrets he was already keeping from Catherine, but underneath the guilt was something else, a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. Emma had awakened something in him that he had thought was dead, a capacity for connection that went beyond duty and obligation. The children greeted him with their usual enthusiasm when he arrived home, and William threw himself into the evening routine with unusual energy. He helped George with his homework, played with Charlotte, and read bedtime stories with genuine engagement rather than distracted obligation. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. She would be staying in Scotland for another week. After the children were asleep, William sat in his study with a glass of whiskey, staring at Emma's number in his phone. He knew he should delete it, should chalk up the afternoon to a moment of weakness and return to his carefully controlled existence. But, as he sat there in the silence of the palace, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had sacrificed personal happiness for duty, he couldn't bring himself to erase this one connection to something real. Instead, he typed a simple message: "Thank you for today. It meant more than you know." Her response came quickly: "Sleep well, William." The use of his first name, without title or formality, sent a warmth through him that lingered long into the night. For the first time in months, Prince William fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming not of duty or obligation, but of brown eyes that saw him as simply, beautifully human. The Bloomsbury Gallery was a world away from the grand institutions William usually frequented for cultural events. Tucked between a used bookstore and a small cafe, the space featured contemporary works by emerging artists, pieces that challenged conventional perspectives and dared viewers to see the world differently. William arrived early, wandering through the quiet rooms with an appreciation he rarely had time to indulge during official gallery openings. A week had passed since their lunch, and William had thought about Emma constantly. During meetings about homelessness initiatives, while reviewing speeches about conservation, even while helping Charlotte practice her reading, Emma's words echoed in his mind. Her suggestion that he was carrying his mother's mission alone had haunted him, forcing him to acknowledge a loneliness he had been refusing to face. Catherine had called from Scotland the night before, her voice strained with exhaustion as she described her mother's declining condition. The conversation had been functional, focused on practical matters: how long she might need to stay, whether she should bring the children for a visit, logistics of upcoming royal engagements. Neither of them had asked how the other was feeling, and William realized with startling clarity that they had stopped having those conversations months ago. "You look deep in thought," Emma's voice came from behind him as he stood before a painting of storm clouds gathering over a familiar cityscape. William turned, and the sight of her made his chest tighten with an emotion he didn't want to name. She wore dark jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked more beautiful than he remembered. More dangerous too, because in the week apart he had almost convinced himself that his attraction to her was simply loneliness making him imagine connections that didn't exist. "I was thinking about storms," William said, gesturing toward the painting. "How they can be destructive but also necessary. Sometimes you need the old landscape to be swept away before something new can grow." Emma studied the painting with him, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that suited her completely. "Are you speaking metaphorically, Your Royal Highness?" The formal title sounded wrong coming from her, and William winced. "Just William, please. When you use the title, it reminds me of all the reasons this is impossible." "And when I use your name?" "When you use my name, I forget who I'm supposed to be," he admitted quietly. They moved through the gallery slowly, discussing the artwork with an ease that surprised them both. Emma had a way of seeing beyond the obvious, finding meaning in abstract pieces that initially looked like chaos to William. She pointed out how one artist used negative space to represent loss, how another employed vibrant colors to mask deeper melancholy. "You see things differently than most people," William observed as they paused before a sculpture made of twisted metal and glass. "Maybe I just ask different questions," Emma replied. "Most people look at art and ask, what is it? I prefer to ask, what does it make me feel? And what does this make you feel?" William asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Emma was quiet for a moment, studying the piece. "Trapped," she said finally. "But also breaking free. Like something beautiful is trying to emerge from something that was meant to contain it." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. William found himself staring at Emma rather than the sculpture, wondering if she was still talking about art or if they had moved into more dangerous territory. "Shall we get some air?" he suggested, suddenly, needing to escape the intimate atmosphere of the gallery. They walked to Russell Square, finding a bench overlooking the gardens. It was a crisp November afternoon, and the autumn leaves created a carpet of gold and red around them. William watched Emma as she observed the families playing with their children, the elderly couples feeding pigeons, the students reading on nearby benches.
Do you ever regret not having a normal life? Emma asked suddenly.
The question caught William off guard with its directness. Most people assumed his privileged position compensated for any sacrifices he had made.
Every day, he said honestly. Especially lately. What would normal look like for you? William considered the question seriously. I think I would have stayed in the military longer. Maybe become a career pilot. I would live somewhere quiet, maybe near the coast. I would coach Georgia's football team on weekends and take family holidays without security details and photographers. And your marriage?
The question felt like a probe into the most vulnerable part of his life. William was quiet for a long moment, watching a father push his daughter on a swing, her laughter carrying across the square. I married Catherine because she was safe, he said finally. She understood the requirements of royal life, she came from a stable family, she wanted the same things I was supposed to want.
We were compatible. That sounds more like a business arrangement than a marriage. In many ways, it was, William admitted.
I convinced myself that compatibility was enough, that love would grow from mutual respect and shared goals.
And, maybe it did, for a while.
But, somewhere along the way, we stopped being individuals and became a unit designed to serve the crown. Emma turned to face him fully, her expression serious.
And, what do you want now? The loaded nature of the question wasn't lost on either of them.
William met her gaze, seeing his own longing reflected in her brown eyes.
I want to feel alive again, he said.
I want conversations that matter, connections that go deeper than small talk about charity galas and state dinners. I want someone to see me as more than a title or a role.
William, Emma said softly, and the way she spoke his name made his heart race. This is dangerous for both of us. I know, he replied. But, I can't stop thinking about you. About how you made me feel at that cafe.
Like I was worth knowing, beyond everything else.
Emma looked away, and William could see her struggling with the same conflict that had been tearing at him all week. The rational part of her mind understood the impossibility of their situation, but something deeper was pulling her toward him with a force she couldn't deny. I've been thinking about you too, she admitted quietly. More than I should. I keep replaying our conversation, wondering what it would be like if circumstances were different. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of mutual attraction settling between them. William had been faithful to Catherine throughout their marriage, despite numerous opportunities and a media that seemed constantly searching for signs of royal infidelity. But his commitment had never been truly tested by someone who touched his soul the way Emma did. Tell me about your life, William said, desperate to steer the conversation away from the dangerous current running between them. What do you do when you're not analyzing tragic princes? Emma laughed, and the sound loosened something tight in William's chest. I lead a fairly quiet life, actually. I volunteer at a children's grief center on weekends, I read too many books, I have a cat named Gatsby who judges all my life choices. Gatsby? I was going through a Fitzgerald phase when I adopted him, Emma explained with a smile. He's a gray tabby with literary pretensions. William found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in days. I'd like to meet him sometime. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and both of them froze at the implication. An invitation to her apartment would cross every line they had been carefully dancing around. William. Emma began, but he cut her off. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. I shouldn't have. I would like that too, Emma interrupted softly. Which is exactly why it can't happen. The honesty in her voice was both devastating and relieving. At least they were acknowledging what was growing between them rather than pretending it didn't exist. What if I wasn't who I am? William asked suddenly. What if I was just a man you met at a charity event, someone with a normal job and a normal life? Emma considered the hypothetical seriously. Then, we would probably be having dinner together tonight instead of sitting on a bench trying to convince ourselves this is just friendship. The admission hung between them, confirming what they both knew but had been afraid to voice. This wasn't just friendship. This wasn't just two people enjoying intellectual conversation. This was attraction, deep and mutual and increasingly difficult to ignore. William's phone buzzed with a text message. James, his protection officer, was discreetly reminding him about an evening engagement. The outside world was calling him back, demanding his return to duty and obligation. "I have to go," William said reluctantly. "There's a reception for the Environmental Foundation tonight." "Of course," Emma said, and William thought he detected disappointment in her voice. "Back to your real life." "This feels more real than anything I've done in months," William said intensely. "These conversations with you, the way you listen, the way you see me, this is more real than any reception or gala or state dinner." Emma stood from the bench, and William rose with her. They faced each other in the fading afternoon light, both understanding that they were approaching a point of no return. The next time they met, they would have to make a choice about what this relationship was going to become. "Emma," William said her name like a prayer. "I know this is complicated, and I know the risks. But I need you to know that whatever happens, these moments with you have been a gift. You've reminded me who I used to be, who I could be again." She reached out and briefly touched his arm, the contact electric even through his jacket. "You're a good man, William. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, including yourself." As they walked back toward their cars, William felt the familiar weight of his role settling back onto his shoulders. In a few hours, he would be charming donors and discussing conservation initiatives, playing the part of the dedicated royal. But part of him would remain in Russell Square, sitting on a bench with a woman who saw past his title to the lonely, searching person underneath. "When can I see you again?" he asked as they reached the street. "Is that wise?" Emma asked, though her tone suggested she wanted to say yes as much as he wanted to hear it. "Probably not," William admitted. "But I'm tired of always doing the wise thing." Emma smiled, and William memorized the expression, knowing it would have to sustain him through the evening's obligations. "There's a lecture series at University College London next Thursday. Contemporary Approaches to Treating Childhood Trauma. I'll be there." "What time?" 7 o'clock. "But, William." She paused, her expression growing serious. "If you come, we both know what it means. We can't keep pretending this is casual friendship." William nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Attending the lecture would be a choice, a deliberate step toward whatever was growing between them. It would mean acknowledging that he was willing to risk everything for a connection that felt more real than his carefully constructed life. "I'll be there," he said without hesitation. Emma looked at him for a long moment, as if memorizing his face. "Then, I'll see you Thursday." The drive back to Kensington Palace gave William time to think about what he was doing. He was a married father of 3, second in line to the throne, about to embark on something that could destroy his family and damage the monarchy. The rational part of his mind screamed that he should stop this before it went any further. But, as he navigated through London traffic, he thought about the conversation with Emma, about the way she had looked at him with genuine interest rather than calculated deference. He thought about coming home to empty rooms and stilted phone calls with his wife, about the decades of carefully managed public appearances that stretched ahead of him. By the time he reached the palace, William had made his decision. He would go to the lecture. He would take that step into unknown territory, following a connection that felt more vital than anything he had experienced in years. Whatever the consequences, he could no longer deny the hunger for authentic human connection that Emma had awakened in him. The evening reception passed in a blur of handshakes and small talk. William performed his role flawlessly, discussing climate change initiatives and conservation efforts with passion and expertise. But, throughout the evening, his mind wandered to Emma, to the lecture she had mentioned, to the choice he would have to make in the coming days. As he prepared for bed that night, William caught sight of himself in the mirror and was surprised by what he saw. Despite the guilt and uncertainty, there was something in his eyes that had been missing for months: hope. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with duty or obligation. He thought about texting Emma, but decided against it. Thursday was only 5 days away, and, when he saw her again, it would be with full knowledge of what their relationship was becoming. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump, trusting that something would catch him on the way down. In 5 days, Prince William would make a choice that would change everything. But, for tonight, he fell asleep thinking about brown eyes and genuine laughter, about conversations that mattered and the dangerous promise of feeling truly alive again. The lecture hall at University College London was half empty when William arrived, having deliberately chosen a seat in the back corner where shadows would help conceal his identity. He wore dark jeans, a black sweater, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. James sat several rows away, pretending to be an interested academic while maintaining his protective watch. William's hands trembled slightly as he waited for Emma to arrive. The past week had been torture, filled with second-guessing and moments of clarity that alternately convinced him he was making the right choice and the worst mistake of his life. Catherine had returned from Scotland the day before, full of grief and exhaustion over her mother's deteriorating condition. Their reunion had been cordial but distant, both of them going through the motions of married life without any real connection. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was risking his marriage for a woman he had spent perhaps 6 hours with in total. But those 6 hours had contained more genuine emotion and understanding than months of interactions with his wife. Emma had seen through his carefully constructed public persona to the man underneath, and she had liked what she found there. The lecturer, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, was discussing new therapeutic approaches for children dealing with parental loss when Emma slipped into the hall. William's breath caught as he watched her navigate toward the middle section, her dark hair catching the light as she settled into her seat. She had clearly come straight from work, wearing a professional burgundy dress with a navy blazer, and she looked every inch the accomplished psychologist she was. For the next hour, William tried to focus on Dr. Mitchell's presentation about play therapy and art-based interventions, but his attention kept drifting to Emma. He watched the way she took notes, how she leaned forward when something particularly interested her, the small smile that crossed her face when the lecturer shared success stories about children finding their voices again after trauma. During the question period, Emma stood to ask about long-term outcomes for children who had experienced public grief, those whose losses had been scrutinized by media and, well-meaning but intrusive public interest. William realized with a jolt that she was asking for him, trying to understand his own experience through professional inquiry. "That's an excellent question," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Public grief creates additional layers of complexity because the child's natural mourning process becomes performative. They're not just dealing with loss, but with expectations about how that loss should be expressed and processed." William felt exposed, as if Emma had somehow illuminated his deepest struggle for the entire lecture hall to examine. But there was also relief in hearing his experience validated by an expert, acknowledgement that his ongoing difficulties with grief weren't personal failings but predictable responses to unusual circumstances. As the lecture concluded and people began filing out, William remained in his seat, unsure of the protocol for what came next. He and Emma had established that his presence here meant something significant, but they hadn't discussed the practicalities of how to proceed. Emma solved the dilemma by approaching him directly, though she maintained the casual demeanor of someone reconnecting with an acquaintance rather than embarking on a dangerous liaison. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, though her smile suggested she had hoped exactly that. "I found the topic compelling," William replied, standing and removing his cap. Dr. Mitchell's insights about public grief were particularly illuminating. Emma's eyes searched his face, looking for confirmation that he understood what she had been doing with her question. "Sometimes it helps to have expert validation for our experiences," she said softly. The crowd was thinning around them, and William realized they needed to move their conversation somewhere more private. The campus coffee shop was still open, but it would offer little privacy. Emma seemed to read his thoughts. "Would you like to get some air?" she suggested. "The campus gardens are quite beautiful in the evening." They walked in comfortable silence through the university corridors and out into the crisp November evening. The gardens were indeed beautiful, with carefully maintained flower beds and old trees that provided natural alcoves for private conversation. String lights illuminated the pathways, creating an atmosphere that felt both romantic and safely public. "Thank you," William said as they found a secluded bench near a small fountain. "For the question about public grief. I've never heard anyone articulate it that way before.
I've been thinking about your situation since our last conversation, Emma admitted. I wanted to understand the psychological framework for what you experienced. Dr. Mitchell's research suggests that unresolved grief from childhood can create attachment difficulties in adult relationships. The observation hit William like a physical blow. Are you psychoanalyzing me, Dr. Richardson? I'm trying to understand you, Emma said gently. And, maybe help you understand yourself. You mentioned feeling disconnected from your wife. It's possible that your unprocessed grief is making it difficult for you to form deep emotional bonds. William was quiet for several minutes, processing her words. The idea that his mother's death was still affecting his relationships 26 years later was both devastating and, oddly, hopeful. If his emotional distance was a symptom rather than a character flaw, perhaps it could be addressed. Catherine says I use my mother's death as an excuse to avoid intimacy, he said finally. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just broken. You're not broken, Emma said firmly. You're responding normally to an abnormal situation. Most children who lose parents get privacy to grieve, therapy to process their feelings, time to heal without public scrutiny. You had to perform your grief for the world while somehow continuing to function as a royal. That would damage anyone's ability to trust and connect. The validation was overwhelming. William felt tears threatening, emotions he had been suppressing for years suddenly, demanding acknowledgement. I don't know how to fix it, he whispered. The first step is recognizing the problem, Emma said. The second step is deciding whether you want to heal or stay comfortable in your dysfunction.